She always dreamed of independence, but in the dark silence of her new home, something else dreamed of her. On her first Friday night living alone, she discovered she was never truly alone. Nora pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into her new house, the place she would finally live all by herself. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty hardwood floor, and the air smelled faintly of old wood and varnish. It was modest but charming, a small two-story house on a quiet street, complete with an empty basement that she planned to use for storage. This was meant to be a fresh start, a taste of adult freedom and independence. Yet, as she set down the last of her moving boxes, Nora could not shake a slight chill that trickled down her spine. It felt as if the house exhaled a cold breath the moment she entered, as if acknowledging her presence in a hushed greeting. Shaking off the feeling, Nora spent the rest of the day unpacking. She arranged her furniture, set up her bed, and put kitchenware in the cupboards, filling the silent house with the noise of normal life. By the time dusk arrived on Friday, Nora was exhausted but pleased with her progress. She cooked a simple dinner and ate on the couch amid half-unpacked boxes, the TV murmuring in the background for company. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the trees in the yard. Occasionally, a floorboard creaked upstairs, settling with the change in temperature. Each time it happened, Nora's eyes flickered toward the ceiling, but she reminded herself an old house like this would make random noises. Night fully fell. Nora decided to get some sleep. Tomorrow would be another busy day of organizing. She turned off the TV, plunging the house into quiet, and climbed the narrow stairs to her bedroom. The hallway light flickered once as she passed by, making her pause mid-step, but then it held steady. Probably just an electrical hiccup, she told herself. The previous owner did say the house's wiring was old. In her bedroom, Nora changed into pajamas and slipped under the covers. The room was still strange to her. Shadows from the street lamp outside draped themselves across the walls in unfamiliar shapes. She took a deep breath, telling herself that every new house feels eerie the first night. It's just nerves. With that comforting thought, she closed her eyes. Sometime after midnight, Nora awoke with a start. She wasn't sure why at first. She listened intently to the dark. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Yet her heart pounded as if something had startled her awake. She glanced at the clock. 12:47 a.m., now officially early Saturday, meaning she had just passed her first Friday night here. She almost laughed at herself for feeling jumpy, but as she rolled over, ready to sink back into sleep, she heard it, a faint thump somewhere below. Nora's eyes snapped open. The sound had been muffled but distinct, like something falling on a carpeted floor. She held her breath, listening. A long moment of silence followed. Perhaps a box fell over in the living room? She reasoned it could be one of the half-unpacked boxes she'd stacked precariously. That must be it, she assured herself. Curling back into her blankets, Nora tried to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping into her stomach. Just as she began dozing off again, thump, there it was a second time, louder and clearly from below. It sounded like it came from the basement. Nora's pulse quickened. Probably just the house settling, or maybe I left a window open and a draft knocked something over, she thought, trying to be rational. Summoning courage, Nora decided to investigate rather than lie in fear all night. She slid out of bed, grabbed her phone for light, and quietly tiptoed downstairs. The wooden steps groaned under her weight. In the living room, nothing seemed out of place. The boxes were as she left them. There was no objects on the floor that could have caused a thump. She frowned, half relieved and half perplexed. Maybe something outside, but it had distinctly sounded inside. As she turned to head back upstairs, the phone light passed over the far corner by the old furnace, and Nora froze. For a split second, she thought she saw a figure standing there, a woman or a girl just at the edge of the light's reach. It was as if someone stood partly behind the furnace, peeking out. Her breath caught in her throat. She jerked the light back toward that corner. Nothing. The corner was empty, just an old rocking chair covered in a white sheet that the previous owner had left behind. The sheet's edge fluttered slightly in the draft. Nora's heart hammered. Had her mind played tricks on her? It must have been an illusion, a play of light and shadow combined with her drowsy state. For a moment, it had truly looked like a pale face watching her behind the furnace. She exhaled slowly, feeling silly. Get a grip, Nora. You're scaring yourself. Back upstairs, she firmly shut the basement door and even slid the bolt latch closed. She returned to bed, telling herself it was nothing, perhaps a stray dream that woke her, and the thumps could have been any random noise. Eventually, after an hour of listening intently to the silence and hearing nothing further, Nora drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, sunlight bathed the house, chasing away the unsettling feelings of the night. Nora busied herself with more unpacking, trying to put the previous night's fears behind her. She rationalized everything over coffee. Old houses have weird noises. She was stressed and imagined that figure. It's not unusual to be jumpy the first night alone somewhere new. By the time evening rolled around on Friday, Nora felt more at home. She even invited her friend Lily to come see the house on Sunday. Pleased with the thought of having some company soon, Nora went to bed that night much calmer. However, in the middle of that night, something jolted her awake again. It was subtle this time, the sound of a door clicking shut. Nora's eyes flew open in the dark. She reached out and felt her bedroom door. It was still closed. The sound wasn't from there. Her mind immediately went to the one door she'd locked, the basement door. Grabbing her phone, she crept out of bed and peered down the stairs. From the top step, she had a view of the entry to the kitchen where the basement door was. In the faint glow from a nightlight in the hall, she could see the basement door clearly. It was wide open. She was sure she had latched it earlier. A chill blasted through her as if the open doorway exhaled the basement's cold, musty air straight at her. Nora stifled a gasp and retreated to her bedroom, heart pounding furiously. Someone was in the house. They had to be. Doors do not open themselves. Did she forget to lock the front door? Could an intruder have gotten in? But why would they go into the basement? She silently searched her bedside drawer for something to use for protection. Her fingers closed around a heavy flashlight. Weapon in hand, she forced herself to tiptoe back down the stairs, careful to skip the steps she knew would creak. Each breath she took seemed too loud in her ears. The basement door still gaped open like a silent black maw. She hesitated, skin crawling in fear. Then, summoning every ounce of courage, she rushed forward and slammed the basement door shut hard. She threw the bolt latch back into place. If someone was down there, they were locked in now, she thought with panic. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911 on her phone to report a possible intruder. The dispatcher told her to stay on the line and wait for officers, who were on their way. Nora clutched the phone and flashlight tightly, backing away from the door. She could hear nothing from behind it, not a shuffle. The dispatcher's voice was a distant murmur compared to the sound of her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. Minutes felt like hours as she waited. Then, just as distant sirens became audible, Nora heard a soft scratching at the basement door, then a slow, deliberate knock. Knock, knock, knock. The gentle, eerie rhythm was nothing like a panicked intruder trying to get out. It was composed, almost polite. Nora's blood ran cold. She backed further away, almost to the living room now, and watched in mounting terror as the basement door latch began to slide on its own. The bolt scraped metal on metal, inching open by an invisible force. "No," she whispered. The latch slid free with a click. Then, with agonizing slowness, the door creaked ajar. A sliver of darkness peeked through the widening gap. The police sirens were close now. Red and blue lights strobed through the front window as a patrol car pulled up. Nora wanted to run outside, but she was rooted in fear, eyes locked on that basement door. It swung wider, revealing the top of the staircase.
The darkness below was impenetrable, as if even the flashlight's beam would be swallowed. A figure stepped onto the bottom of the staircase, a pale shape in the dark. Nora could just make out a face, chalk-white skin and eyes that reflected the light like a cat's, fixed on her from the shadows. The mouth stretched into a grin that was all wrong, too wide and filled with teeth that looked sharpened to points. Nora felt a scream rising in her throat as the creature began to ascend the stairs, one slow step at a time. Bang, bang, bang! Sudden, loud pounding on the front door broke the spell. "Police, is anybody home?" a voice called. The creature on the stairs halted, its head snapping toward the front of the house. Nora seized the opportunity, and with a surge of adrenaline, she bolted to the front door, fumbling with the latch. In that split second, the basement door...
Before you keep watching, hit like, subscribe, and tell me how you feel down in the comments. Alex moved in with a stranger to avoid living alone, but sometimes loneliness is safer. On Friday nights, he wonders if the stranger sharing his home is even human. Alex dragged the last moving box into the small rental house and wiped sweat from his brow. It was a modest two-bedroom home on a quiet cul-de-sac. The rent was affordable because he was splitting it with a roommate, a guy named Jake he had met online. Alex hadn't wanted to live completely alone in a new city, and at first, having a roommate felt like a comfort. But as the days went by, Alex began to feel that living with a stranger could be far more unsettling than being by himself. Jake was polite during the initial meetings, if a bit reserved. He was a tall, lanky man in his late 20s with a soft voice and a habit of avoiding eye contact. On move-in day, he helped Alex carry boxes and even offered to share some of his own furniture until Alex got settled. The first red flag was subtle. Jake insisted on taking the basement bedroom for himself. The house technically had 3 bedrooms, 2 upstairs and 1 in the basement. Alex was relieved to have the upstairs to himself and didn't mind. He assumed Jake wanted the extra privacy. Their first week as housemates went smoothly enough. They spoke little, as Jake often kept to himself. He worked odd hours at a job he described only as freelance research, often leaving in the evenings and returning late at night. On several occasions, Alex woke to the sound of the front door closing in the early AM hours, or the faint creak of the basement door opening and shutting. Jake always offered a terse apology if he accidentally woke Alex, explaining he was just grabbing something he left in the living room or kitchen. Alex accepted these explanations at first, though he found it a bit strange that Jake's schedule was so erratic. As the Friday night arrived at the end of that first week, Alex decided to try being friendly. He knocked on the basement door and invited Jake to join him for a beer and a movie in the living room. There was a pause, and then Jake came up, smiling thinly. They sat on the couch and watched a thriller. Conversation was awkward, mostly small talk. Alex noticed Jake hardly blinked while watching the movie's violent scenes, seemingly fascinated. At one point, Jake asked an odd question with an intense tone. "Do you ever think about what it feels like to die?" The question hung in the air unnervingly. Alex chuckled nervously, hoping it was a joke. Not really, man. That's a bit morbid," he replied. Jake gave a slow nod and turned back to the TV without another word. The rest of the night, Jake was quiet, and when the movie ended, he excused himself and headed back downstairs, saying he was tired. Alex tried to shrug off the strange moment. Perhaps Jake was just socially awkward. Not everyone knows how to make small talk. Still, as Alex lay in bed that night, he couldn't get that question out of his mind. There had been something in Jake's voice, an undercurrent of longing or curiosity too deep for a casual inquiry. Eventually, Alex fell into a fitful sleep. Over the next week, Jake's odd behaviors became more noticeable. Sometimes, late at night, Alex heard muffled sounds through the vent that connected his room to the basement below. It sounded like chanting or low muttering, and occasionally a soft laugh or sob. When he asked Jake about it the next morning, mentioning he heard him talking, Jake just stared with an unreadable expression and said, "Sometimes I talk in my sleep."
One night, Alex came home from work later than usual, around 11 p.m. The house was dark. As he fumbled for the light switch in the front hall, he glimpsed something in the darkness, a shape standing by the kitchen entrance. Startled, he flipped the light on, heart lurching. It was Jake, standing motionless in the dark kitchen. "Jake, you okay?" Alex asked, voice uneasy. Jake gave a start, as if coming out of a daze. "I'm fine," he said quietly. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to the basement door, disappearing into the blackness downstairs. Alex stood there, unsettled. Had Jake been standing there in total darkness waiting for him, or sleepwalking? The encounter sent a prickle of fear through Alex. He decided then to keep his distance as much as possible. By the time the second Friday since Alex moved in rolled around, the tension in the house was palpable. Alex found himself triple-checking the locks on his bedroom door each night, although he had no clear reason to suspect Jake would do anything to him. It was just a gut feeling, an instinct that something was off. Late that Friday evening, as Alex was brushing his teeth in the upstairs bathroom, he heard the low hum of chanting again through the vent. It was more distinct this time, a rhythmic murmur of words he couldn't make out. Turning off the faucet, he pressed his ear to the vent. The voice was definitely Jake's, droning in some unfamiliar language, or possibly just gibberish. His skin crawled. This didn't sound like ordinary talking in sleep. It sounded deliberate, ritualistic. He crept out into the hallway, which was directly above the living room and the door to the basement. There, he could hear the muffled voice rising up through the floorboards. Alex's heart pounded. He felt a strong urge to know what Jake was doing. Was this some kind of cult practice, or was Jake mentally unstable, talking to himself? Either way, Alex began to fear for his safety. The smart move would be to leave the house, find a friend's place to crash, or even a motel, but a morbid curiosity and concern took hold. What if Jake was in some trouble or hurting someone down there? Gathering his nerve, Alex decided to take a quick, silent look. He tiptoed down the stairs. The house was dark, except for a faint orange glow seeping from under the basement door, candlelight. He hadn't seen Jake bring home anyone, and there were no voices except Jake's droning chant. Alex gingerly tried the knob. To his surprise, it wasn't locked. Slowly, he eased the basement door open, careful not to make a sound. The chanting grew louder as the crack widened. Peering in, Alex saw the basement illuminated by dozens of candles placed in a circle on the floor. The air smelled of hot wax and something earthy and coppery, the scent of blood. Jake stood in the center of the circle, his back turned, shirtless, his arms raised in a bizarre pose. On the floor before him was what looked like a small animal carcass, maybe a rabbit or a cat, lying atop a strange symbol drawn on the concrete in what had to be blood. Alex had to clamp his hand over his mouth to stifle a gasp. His stomach churned. Jake's chanting stopped abruptly. "I know you're there, Alex," he said in a flat voice without turning around. Alex's blood went cold. He'd been so careful, or so he thought. Heart hammering, Alex took a step back, ready to bolt. But before he could retreat, Jake turned and dashed to the stairs in 3 quick strides. He slammed the door fully open, knocking Alex off balance. Alex stumbled backward onto the hallway floor. Jake loomed over him from the top of the staircase. In the flickering candlelight behind him, his silhouette looked inhumanly tall and contorted. His eyes were wide and wild now, no longer avoiding Alex's gaze but boring into him. There was a smear of blood across Jake's bare chest and forearms from the ritual, and in his hand a long, curved knife glinted. "Jake, what are you doing?" Alex managed to stammer, crawling backward. His mind was racing with terror. Jake tilted his head, a slow smile spreading across his lips. In a voice almost gentle, he said, "Don't be afraid. This is for a greater purpose. I'm sorry you had to see that. I was hoping to keep it a surprise." He took a step forward out of the doorway. Alex scrambled to his feet, putting the couch between them. "You're insane! I'm calling the police!" he shouted, trying to sound braver than he felt. He fumbled for his cell phone in his pocket, but realized with dread that he'd left it charging in his bedroom upstairs. Jake sighed, as if disappointed. "I wish you hadn't said that, I really do." He began to move slowly, deliberately around the couch. In that moment, the dim light fell fully on Jake's face, and Alex's breath caught. Jake's expression was a horrifying mix of ecstasy and anguish, and his eyes, were those tears? Jake was crying as he smiled. "I'm told I have to," Jake whispered, voice breaking. "For the summoning. The gate opens tonight, Friday at midnight. I only have until dawn to give them what they want." Alex had no idea what Jake was raving about, but he knew one thing: he was in mortal danger. He grabbed a lamp from an end table and yanked its cord from the wall, wielding it like a club. "Stay back," he warned, voice shaking. Jake lunged, swinging the curved knife. Alex yelped and jumped away. The blade slashed the air inches from his chest. Without thinking, Alex hurled the lamp. It struck Jake in the shoulder, and the bulb shattered, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the meager glow from the basement candles. Jake barely flinched. If anything, the momentary darkness seemed to invigorate him. In the gloom, Alex could only make out a moving shadow as Jake vaulted over the couch with surprising agility. Jake collided with Alex, knocking him to the ground. They grappled. Alex felt white-hot pain as the knife sliced a shallow cut across his upper arm. He cried out, struggling, adrenaline pumping. The two rolled on the floor, the ritual knife clattering away into the shadows. For an instant, Alex managed to pin Jake down, remembering some wrestling moves from high school. "Stop! We can get you help, Jake!" he panted. Jake only laughed, a deranged sound.
The old house was supposed to be Maya's sanctuary, a place for a new beginning. But every Friday night, something ancient and hungry stirs in the cellar, and Maya is about to discover that some secrets should stay buried. Maya turned the key and pushed open the front door of her new home, a charming Victorian-style house she'd purchased on the outskirts of a small town. The late afternoon sun filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the parquet floor. Maya hoped this house would mark a turning point in her life, a chance to leave the pain of the past year behind. The house had stood vacant for some time, but it was in decent shape, just in need of a little love and cleaning. She spent her first day dusting the shelves, unpacking her belongings, and wiping grime from the ornate banister that led upstairs. Neighbors had been polite but somewhat distant, though one elderly man walking his dog had paused to say with a knowing look, "Hope you'll like it here. That old place has its quirks." When she asked him what he meant, he merely hurried off with a vague, apologetic smile. The cryptic comment left her curious, but she shrugged it off as small-town eccentricity. As evening fell on Friday, Maya had managed to make the living room cozy. She curled up on the couch with a mug of tea, scrolling through her phone. The house was quiet, so quiet, in fact, that the ticking of an old clock on the mantel sounded thunderous. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and a loose shutter on an upstairs window tapped intermittently. It would take time to get used to the new sounds of this house. Maya decided to head to bed early. Moving in had been exhausting. She turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, the old steps creaking with each footfall. At the end of the hallway was her bedroom, directly above the kitchen and adjacent to the door that led up to the attic. The realtor had mentioned the attic and basement were mostly empty, used for storage by previous owners. Maya hadn't had time to explore them yet. That night, she drifted into a deep sleep as soon as her head hit the pillow. Sometime in the middle of the night, however, a faint thud woke her. Maya opened her eyes groggily. The house was dark, illuminated only by a sliver of moonlight through the curtains. She held her breath, listening. A soft scraping noise drifted up from below, as if a chair was being dragged across the floor. Her heart fluttered. Probably just the wind rattling something, she assured herself. The house was old, noises were to be expected. She got up quietly and peeked out her bedroom door. The hallway was pitch black. The scraping sound had stopped. Maya glanced toward the stairs and saw nothing unusual. After a few tense minutes of silence, she convinced herself she must have imagined it, and eventually crawled back into bed. The next morning, sunlight and the chirping of birds made the night's scare seem almost silly. Maya went downstairs to the kitchen to make breakfast. As she entered, she froze in the doorway.
One of the wooden chairs that belonged at the kitchen table was out of place, pulled away from the table and turned towards the hallway, as if someone had sat in it, observing the kitchen doorway. Maya's skin prickled. She was sure she hadn't left it like that. She had eaten a quick dinner at the counter and didn't even use the table last night. Maya slowly approached the chair. An uneasy laugh escaped her. "I must have bumped it while unpacking," she murmured under her breath. Yet doubt gnawed at her. She clearly remembered pushing all the chairs in while tidying up. She shrugged it off and pushed the chair back under the table. To ease her mind, she spent part of Saturday exploring the house more thoroughly in daylight. Armed with a flashlight, she descended the narrow stairs to the basement first. It was a typical old cellar: stone walls, a concrete floor, and a musty smell of mildew. The single naked light bulb hanging from the ceiling cast a feeble yellow glow. Maya's footsteps echoed as she moved among a few discarded items left behind: a rusty metal bucket, some broken picture frames, and an old trunk covered in cobwebs. Inside the trunk, she found nothing but a moth-eaten quilt. Satisfied there were no surprises lurking, she locked the basement door when she came back up. For extra measure, she slid a heavy hutch in the hallway a few inches, so it partially blocked the basement door. It made her feel safer somehow, knowing there was a physical barrier there. Next, Maya pulled down the attic ladder and ascended into the attic's dim, dust-filled space. Sunlight peeked through a small round window, illuminating motes of dust swirling in the air. The attic was mostly empty, except for some old newspapers stacked in a corner and a rocking chair near the window. The sight of the rocking chair gave her a strange feeling, as if someone might be sitting there gazing out at the street. She approached it, running her hand over the chair's back. The wood was smooth and worn with age. With a small grunt, Maya dragged the rocking chair away from the window and turned it to face the wall. Somehow she preferred it that way, out of sight, less like it was expecting someone to sit and watch. Among the newspapers, one caught her eye. It was brittle and yellowed. The date was nearly 30 years ago. The headline read, "Family Tragedy at Oak Lane House." Her heart skipped when she realized Oak Lane was her new street. Skimming the article, she pieced it together. A couple and their young daughter had lived in this very house. On a Friday night in 1996, the father, in a fit of madness, murdered his wife in the basement and then took his own life. Their little girl, Jessica, was found hiding in a closet, alive but traumatized. The article mentioned that the child claimed a shadow man from the basement told her daddy to do it. Maya felt a chill that made her shiver despite the warm attic. She set the newspaper aside, hand trembling. Was this why the house had stood empty for so long? That evening, Maya tried to distract herself with TV and phone calls. She invited her friend Clara to come over next weekend, partly because she didn't want to spend another weekend night completely alone after reading that article. Clara agreed, joking that Maya was getting spooked by the new house jitters. As night fell on Sunday, Maya braced herself for possibly another round of unexplained noises. But the night passed uneventfully, and her nerves settled a bit. Perhaps whatever happened in that house was firmly in the past. The little girl, Jessica, had survived and presumably moved on with her life. Maybe the shadow man was just the hallucination of a traumatized child. Monday through Thursday flew by. Maya was busy with her new remote job and settling into a routine. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, aside from that initial scare. By the time Friday rolled around again, the previous week's incidents had started to fade from her mind. That Friday evening, Clara had to postpone her visit by a week, so Maya was on her own. She made herself a nice dinner and tried to ignore the nagging anxiety creeping into her thoughts as the sun dipped low. She kept the TV on for company and left a few lights on around the house. At around 11 p.m., Maya grew restless. Remembering the old newspapers, she decided to delve deeper, perhaps to confront her fears. She brought the stack of newspapers down from the attic into the living room and began reading through the old articles about the house. Most were mundane, old real estate listings, a piece about a renovation in the 1980s. But then she found another disturbing clipping, dated 5 years after the original tragedy. It reported that the little girl, Jessica, who had survived, went missing as a teenager. She was last seen on a Friday night near this very property when she came back to live with an uncle. Her disappearance remained unsolved. Maya's hands trembled as she set the papers aside. A sense of dread was building, thick as fog in her chest. 2 Fridays, years apart, 2 horrific events tied to the basement of this house. She glanced at the hallway. From where she sat, she could see the edge of the basement door and the hutch she had left partially blocking it. For a moment, she considered leaving the house for the night, checking into a hotel just in case her fears weren't as irrational as she hoped. Just then, a soft tap came from the direction of the hallway. Her breath caught. It was the same sound as that loose shutter from the other night, but the night was calm, no wind. The tapping came again, slightly louder. It took her a second to realize the sound wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from behind the basement door, as if someone was gently knocking from the inside of the cellar. Her heart went dry. She reached for her phone and quickly texted Clara half-jokingly, "If I text you something weird, call me immediately. This house is creepy, LOL." Perhaps a bit of contact would steady her nerves. Clara hadn't responded yet. The tapping stopped. Silence fell, heavy and expectant. She stood staring down the hallway. The basement door was still shut, the hutch in place. She took a tentative step forward, and suddenly, from upstairs, came a loud bang, like a door slamming. Maya nearly jumped out of her skin. The attic door? Or a closet? Her mind raced. Heart pounding, she retreated to the living room and grabbed the first hefty object she could find, an antique brass candlestick from the mantel. She remembered the stories. The violence had happened in the basement, but something about upstairs. The rocking chair by the window? The attic? Could the father's ghost still roam here? Or the mother's? Or was it the shadow itself? As she edged towards the staircase to investigate the bang, a scratching sound started behind her. Maya whirled around. The scratching was coming from the basement door now, a slow, clawing scrape against the wood, as if something on the other side was trying to get out. The door, thank God, remained shut, but the sound was relentless, a dry, rasping drag of nails on the door. Maya's mind screamed to get out of the house, yet morbid curiosity or terror held her in place. The scratching stopped. In the pregnant pause that followed, Maya realized she was holding her breath. And then, with a violent jolt, the entire house plunged into darkness. The lights, the TV, everything went out, sending her into a blind panic. The electricity had failed, or been cut. The only illumination now came from the faint moonlight through the living room window. Maya fumbled her phone